What would you do if your own son stood in a ballroom full of strangers, laughed, and proudly admitted someone had put you in your place? The chandeliers above me glittered like nothing was wrong. Crystal. Gold light. Expensive perfume in the air. 300 guests in black tie, gathered to celebrate my 68th birthday and the 40th anniversary of the Whitmore Family Medical Foundation. But before we continue, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for updates. And there I stood, with a bruise on my cheek. The orchestra had just finished a soft rendition of Unforgettable. Glasses clinked. Cameras flashed. A donor from cardiology was mid-sentence when Daniel, my son, my only child, 42 years old, raised his champagne flute and laughed. "It was my wife," he said. Loudly. Casually. She finally taught her respect. The music stopped. Not faded. Stopped. You could actually hear someone set down a fork. I didn't move. I didn't blink. Because surely I misheard him. My daughter-in-law, Sophie, 38, adjusted the gold bracelet on her wrist and smiled. Not embarrassed. Not nervous. Composed. Like this was a private joke the rest of us simply didn't understand. Daniel continued, shaking his head as if amused by a child's tantrum. Mom just needs boundaries. Boundaries. That word landed harder than the bruise. Let me tell you something. I built that foundation from nothing after my husband died of a stroke at 51. I worked 18-hour days. I mortgaged our house twice. I paid Daniel's tuition in full. And last year, I handed him executive control of the organization. So tell me, when did I become the problem? Whispers rippled through the room. Board members exchanged looks. A plastic surgeon I've known for 20 years suddenly found his shoes fascinating. Why was Daniel defending Sophie? Why wasn't he asking how I got hurt? And why did Sophie look so certain she was untouchable? That's when I heard footsteps echo across the marble floor. Slow. Measured. Familiar. My older brother, Robert Hayes, 72, retired attorney, and co-trustee of the foundation, stepped out of the crowd. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't look angry. He simply looked at Daniel and said softly, "Are you absolutely sure you want to say that again?" And in that moment, the entire room shifted. Because what Daniel didn't know was that this wasn't about a bruise. And what my brother was about to reveal would change everything. The bruise didn't happen the way Daniel made it sound. It wasn't some dramatic screaming match. It wasn't hysteria. It wasn't me losing control. It was quiet. Calculated. And far more revealing. 24 hours before the gala, I was sitting in Daniel's home office. The one I helped design when he and Sophie moved into that oversized colonial 5 years ago. Mahogany desk. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. Family photos carefully arranged to look effortless. I wasn't there for a fight. I was there because of numbers. $480,000 had been transferred out of the Whitmore Foundation into a consulting firm I didn't recognize. The transaction hit my email because, despite stepping down as executive director, I still receive legacy oversight alerts. Old habits. Old protections. The firm's name was vague. Clinical Strategy Group. Harmless enough. Until I checked the registration. It was filed under Sophie's maiden name. Coincidence? Maybe. But here's what most people don't realize about nonprofits: large transfers trigger automatic audit flags when ownership structures are layered the way ours is. And ours was layered very carefully. I asked Sophie about it calmly. She didn't panic. She didn't deny it. She leaned back in Daniel's leather chair and said, "Margaret, you're retired. Stay retired." That sentence told me more than any spreadsheet ever could. Daniel walked in halfway through. I expected him to ask what was going on. Instead, Sophie spoke first. "She doesn't trust us." Us. That word again. Daniel's posture changed instantly. Defensive. Closed. I showed him the transfer. I asked simple questions. Who approved this? What services were rendered? Why wasn't the board notified? He didn't answer. He said, "Mom, you're being dramatic." Dramatic. I reached across the desk for the printed documents. Sophie grabbed my wrist, tighter than necessary. I pulled back instinctively. My heel caught the edge of a rug. And I hit the corner of the filing cabinet. Hard. The sound was sharp. Metal against bone. Daniel didn't rush forward. He sighed. You need to calm down. I drove myself home that night. Sat in my kitchen. Held ice to my cheek. And for the first time in 42 years, I wondered when my son stopped seeing me as his mother, and started seeing me as an obstacle. I almost didn't attend the gala. Almost. But the foundation was mine long before it was his. And now, standing under those chandeliers while he joked about respect, I realized something chilling. Daniel wasn't protecting Sophie. He was protecting something else. And when my brother asked if he wanted to repeat himself, it wasn't just a warning. It was a test. Because Daniel had no idea who actually held the power. And what Robert knew about that $480,000 transfer was only the beginning. Daniel thought he was in control. That was the first mistake. When Robert stepped forward at the gala, he didn't look like a man about to start a scene. He looked like a man reviewing a contract. Calm. Precise. Almost bored. Daniel, he repeated evenly, do you know who actually owns this foundation? You could feel the air change. Daniel laughed lightly, but it was thinner now. I run it, Uncle Robert. Yes, Robert replied. You manage daily operations. Manage. Not own. Here's something most people don't understand about legacy nonprofits: leadership and ownership are rarely the same thing. Especially when lawyers are involved. And my brother had been a corporate attorney for 45 years. When I stepped down last year at 67, I transferred executive authority to Daniel. Publicly. Formally. The board applauded. Donors celebrated the next generation. But majority ownership? That never changed. 51% remained in a protected family trust. Co-trustees, Robert Hayes. And me. Daniel didn't know. Not because I wanted to deceive him. But because safeguards exist for a reason. 3 months ago, Robert received an automated audit alert triggered by a large outbound transfer request. The $480,000. The system flagged it because dual authorization was required for amounts exceeding $250,000. The second authorization was digitally bypassed. That's not an accident. That's intent. Back in the ballroom, Sophie's smile finally flickered. Just slightly. The way a poker player flinches when someone mentions the river card. Robert continued, still gentle. Tomorrow morning, the board will review unauthorized financial movements connected to a consulting firm registered under Sophie Bennett. Her maiden name hung in the air like smoke. A donor near the front actually gasped. Daniel turned toward Sophie. You told me it was approved. Sophie squeezed his arm. It was structured differently. Structured differently. That's a fascinating phrase when $500,000 disappears. Robert didn't raise his voice. He didn't accuse. He simply added, and Daniel, the firm has no employees. No clients. No physical office. Pause. It's a shell. Silence. Heavy. Suffocating. Have you ever watched someone realize, in real time, that the person they defended might be the very person deceiving them? Daniel's confidence drained visibly. Sophie stepped forward then, chin lifted. You don't have proof. And that's when Robert gave the smallest, most unsettling smile. "Oh," he said quietly. "We do." But the proof wasn't what truly shattered the room. It was what that proof revealed about the past 6 months, and about something else that had gone missing. Something personal. And when I noticed it, everything clicked. The bracelet gave her away. Isn't it strange how the smallest detail can collapse an entire illusion? As Robert's words settled over the ballroom, I found myself staring at Sophie's wrist. Gold. Delicate. Vintage filigree with a tiny emerald clasp. My emerald clasp. It had belonged to my mother. I kept it in a velvet box inside the safe in my study. 2 months ago, I noticed it missing. I assumed I'd misplaced it. At 68, you start questioning your own memory before you question the people around you. But there it was. On her wrist. Under hospital gala lights. Robert nodded subtly toward the projection screen behind the orchestra. The screen flickered on. A financial summary appeared. Transaction dates, routing paths, shell company filings, offshore account linkages. Clean. Clinical. Undeniable. A quiet ripple moved through the crowd. 6 transfers. Not one. Incremental amounts to avoid attention. 48,000. 72,000. 95,000. Total, $482,600. Daniel's voice cracked. "Sophie, what is this?" She kept her posture straight, but her fingers tightened around that bracelet. "It's temporary positioning. Tax strategy. Tax strategy." That's an interesting phrase for an offshore account opened in the Cayman Islands 6 months ago. Robert spoke again, measured as ever. Forensic accountants traced the receiving entity to an IP address registered to your home network. A board member stepped forward. Then another. Sophie's mask slipped. Not dramatically. Just a flicker of calculation. "I did it for us," she said quietly to Daniel. "You deserve more than your mother's shadow." And there it was. Not just money. Resentment. Isolation. Narrative control. Daniel looked at me then, really looked at me, as if seeing the bruise for the first time. Security approached discreetly along the perimeter. No sirens. No spectacle. Just quiet containment. Sophie turned slightly, as if measuring the distance to the exit. Too late. A donor whispered, "Call legal." The orchestra stood frozen, instruments lowered. Daniel swallowed. "Mom, is this true?" Not anger in his voice. Fear. And in that moment, under the same chandeliers where he had laughed minutes earlier, the power he thought he held evaporated completely. But what I said next wasn't what anyone expected. And it didn't just expose Sophie. It exposed him. Silence can be louder than humiliation. 3 minutes earlier, my son had laughed about respect. Now he stood in front of 300 people, waiting for his mother to answer him like a defendant waiting for a verdict. "Mom, is this true?" I stepped forward slowly. No rush. No trembling. The bruise on my cheek felt warm under the lights, but I didn't touch it. "Yes," I said calmly. Every word. A ripple moved through the ballroom again, but this time it wasn't shock. It was recognition. Daniel's shoulders dropped. Not dramatically. Just enough to reveal the weight he suddenly understood he'd been carrying blindly. I looked at him, not as an executive director, not as a board member. As my son. "Daniel," I said evenly, "I never transferred ownership of the foundation." That landed harder than any accusation. "I gave you leadership. I gave you trust. But majority control remains in the family trust. Robert and I never signed it over." His eyes widened. "Why?" And there it was. The question beneath all the others. "Why didn't you trust me?" "Because leadership isn't inherited," I replied. "It's proven." You could feel the donors leaning in. The board members calculating next steps. Sophie standing perfectly still, as if refusing to acknowledge gravity. I continued, my voice steady. The audit alert came 3 months ago. We waited. We documented. We traced every transaction. I hoped I was wrong. Daniel looked at Sophie, then back at me. I didn't know, he whispered. No, I said softly. You didn't. Security approached Sophie again. This time she didn't argue. She simply removed the bracelet from her wrist and placed it on the nearest table without looking at me. Interesting, isn't it? How confidence disappears when evidence arrives. The board chair stepped forward and announced an emergency suspension of Daniel pending review. Gasps. Phones out. Headlines already forming. And yet, I felt no triumph. Only clarity. Under the same chandeliers where he mocked me, my son stood smaller than I had ever seen him. Why didn't you tell me sooner? He asked quietly. I met his eyes. Because you stopped listening. Full circle. Respect isn't forced. It isn't taught through humiliation. It reveals itself when truth enters the room. I turned to the guests and announced I would resume interim leadership effective immediately. The foundation would continue. The mission would stand. And as the orchestra slowly resumed, hesitant at first, I realized something powerful. Sometimes betrayal doesn't shout. It smiles beside you. So let me ask you. If you were in my place, would you forgive him? Or would this be the moment you finally chose yourself?